almost 8 months. That is from the 6th of February 2015 to the 4th of October of 2015. I was a Member of Parliament with Syriza since 2012, and on a political, legal, social and democratic level, I was among those who took very seriously the public commitment and electoral promise to conduct an audit of the public debt and to demand a European conference on debt in order to achieve the abolition of the largest part of the debt, as was done for Germany in 1953. According to those commitments, which were also part of the popular mandate given to the parties constituting the government of Syriza and independent Greeks on the 25th of January 2015, I took the decision in my capacity as President of Parliament to create a special parliamentary committee to audit the Greek public debt, a committee destined to decodify the debt, but also to promote international arguments and international cooperation with other parliaments and with the European Parliament on matters of debt. The committee was comprised by international and national members, by experts in international law, in human rights and constitutional law. It was comprised of economists, auditors, political scientists, but also it was comprised of members of social movements, activists and citizens. And it had the honor to be scientifically coordinated by Eric Toussaint of the CADDM, who undertook this mission with a lot of selflessness and a lot of hard work. The committee was conceived and destined to respond to what had become a public and social demand in Greece, namely the claim of the Greek people for truth and justice in matters of debt. Because among the gravely victimized Greek population, it had become an intrinsic part of public conscience that public debt was being and is being used against the people and against the country as an instrument of subordination, as a tool of extermination, and as a means of expropriation of public wealth and public property. It had become public conscience among the people, among the society, that the public debt was and is being used as a weapon against democracy, against the fundamental rights and freedoms of the people, and against the sovereignty of the state, as well as against parliamentary sovereignty. Ever since 2011, a Citizens' Debt Audit Committee was created to demand an audit of the debt and the abolition of what was instinctively assessed as an illegitimate and odious debt. Because contrary to what had become a central argument in international and internal propaganda, namely that the Greek people had supposedly been living above their means, that they supposedly overspent, that they were supposedly corrupt as a people, and that now they have to pay the price, the people knew that they never profited from state loans. They knew that large-scale corruption had become a modus operandi and even a modus vivendi for their governments. They knew that they never spent nor benefited from the money they were now being asked to pay. And I've been hearing a baby cry during the morning session, and now I heard her or his voice. It's very good to have babies in this kind of discussions to remind us that the whole mechanism of debt is directed against the young, against the children, against the babies. What 325 billion of euros signifies for each baby is actually 32,500 euros of debt when they're born. That's the fate of each Greek baby, or rather, this was the fate of each Greek baby before the third memorandum, because now another 86 billion euros of loans have been added to the previous 325 billions. There she is, or he. It's a she. She's a she. That's why she's shouting. Good. Another 86 billion have been added to the 325 billion euros, which was the previous amount of debt, which now means that each baby born in Greece is called upon to pay 41,000 euros as their personal debt without ever having spent a cent, without ever having voted for those who spent all these extraordinary and extreme amounts, without ever having benefited from public expenses. The people knew, and they know, that the social disaster caused, and particularly the humanitarian crisis victimizing the weaker, the children, the youngsters, the old, the immigrants, could not have been the result of social overspending as was and still is presented and misrepresented. They also knew that what was being presented as the cure to their supposed disease was in fact a lethal poison killing them, killing the people, killing the society. And let me very briefly, in very few words, illustrate what happened in Greece during the last 5 years, because this is a picture of what's happening to Europe during the next years. What's being conducted in Greece is an experiment to what will be conducted Europe-wide, just as what happened in Latin America and in Africa was an experiment to what was implanted and transplanted in Europe. In 2010, the people were told by their governments that the public debt is at a record level of almost, at that point, 120% of the GDP, and that the country needed to undergo urgent and extraordinary policies to be saved from sinking, as it was compared to the Titanic. Policy agreements were concluded between the Greek government and a trio of international institutions, namely the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, called the Troika. This was a first-time creation, a first-time experiment, a first-time monstrous alignment of the three institutions. And these agreements were called MOU, Memoranda of Understanding, and they were linked to loan agreements to Greece, euphemistically named bailout agreements, supposedly destined to bail out the society, the economy, and the country. The agreements were presupposing structural reforms and policies as an exchange for money. And what these reforms actually meant, and reforms is really not only black humor, but a very, very euphemistic term. What these reforms meant were austerity measures, deep public spending cuts, public sector job cuts, tax increases, privatization of public enterprises, and so-called structural reforms, which equal the total destruction of public infrastructures, hospitals, schools, tax offices, but also courts around the country, which were either merged or abolished. These measures basically pushed the economy into deep recession and grossly undermined the enjoyment of fundamental human rights. They resulted in monstrous rates of unemployment, homelessness, poverty, social exclusion, and severely reduced access to public services such as education, healthcare, and justice. After 5 years of measures, after 5 years of memoranda, after 5 years of bailout, the result is that unemployment rose from 9.7% in 2009 to 27% in 2015, with youth unemployment reaching the unprecedented rate of 60% among young men and 72% among young women. And as a result, we have an explosion also of the rates of emigration, young people moving away from the country trying to find a job. A suicide epidemic led to a loss of thousands of human lives out of despair. 1/3 of the private sector workers or employees receive wages as low as half the level of the poverty line. Almost 300,000 households live without electricity for months or for years, and we have had a lot of deaths even among children or youngsters out of suffocation through self-heating machines. More than 500,000 children, that's 1 out of 2 children in Greece, live below the poverty line. Almost 1 out of 2 pensioners in Greece receive pensions as low as half the level of the poverty line. And there has been an unprecedented increase of homelessness. What has been done in terms of attacks to the public sector is a large-scale privatization for very, very low prices of the most strategic infrastructures and public assets. Cuts to healthcare spending well below the European average. Job cuts in the public health sector, closing or merger of hospitals, and a deprivation of medicine even to cancer patients. There have been periods, time and again, when cancer patients did not even have access to their medicine. Schools have been closed down, or they have been operating without books, without heating, or without teachers. And we have time and again the phenomenon of children fainting at school out of starvation. And all this disaster has been imposed through very undemocratic procedures, through monstrous laws inserted in Parliament, through extraordinary procedures of ultra-urgent modalities. We have had hundreds of pages of laws construed in just one article and being required to be voted in a few hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, just in order for the next disbursement to be effectuated. And what has been the result of all this bailing out of Greece? Well, has the debt been decreased? Has it been repaid? No. The debt has raised from less than 120% of the GDP in 2009 to more than 180% today. And still, you have those who impose these measures, the creditors, the Troika, insist that this is the way out, and actually that this is the only way out. This is the only alternative. There's a provision in European law, and that's a disposition in European Regulation number 472, dating 2013, which says, Member States of the European Union subject to a macroeconomic adjustment program shall carry out a comprehensive audit of their public finances in order, inter alia, to assess the reasons that led to the building up of excessive levels of debt, as well as to track any possible irregularity. And this is a provision which was never activated by any of the governments which were subjected to memoranda, beginning from Greece and then going to Portugal, Ireland, Cyprus. This is also a provision which was never activated by the creditors, by the Troika, namely by two European institutions, the European Commission and the European Central Bank. This provision, in my view, and this is my public position, which I also addressed my colleagues at in Rome, my counterparts, presidents of parliaments of the European Union in April 2015. It is my view that this provision does not only represent an international obligation of member states, but it also represents a fundamental right of the European people, and this is a right to be exercised in the name of the living, but also in the name of the next generations. And this is why, based also in this provision, I took the decision to create an audit committee of the Greek public debt, named the Debt Truth Committee, or the Truth Committee on Public Debt. The committee was announced in March 2015, and it was formally created by decision on April 4th, 2015. It had, as I said, Eric Toussaint as its scientific coordinator, whom I would like to wholeheartedly thank for all the work he put in the outcome, but also in the procedure of the committee. And we also had with us and have with us Sofia Sakorafa, a Greek member of the European Parliament, one of the founders of the Citizens Debt Audit Committee, who undertook to promote the relations of the committee with the European Parliament, but also with other parliaments of member states of the European Union. The committee was a first-time experiment in Europe, a first-time incident in Europe, and this is why it was brutally and fiercely attacked. It was the center of libelous publications and articles throughout its works. It was literally the whole system against the committee. And still the committee achieved to perform an extraordinary work, a public work. It conducted public sessions 4 times, on April between 4th and 7th of April, in May between the 4th and the 7th of May, in June between the 15th and the 19th and the 18th of June, and in September, right after the elections and before I ceded my position, from the 22nd to the 25th of September. During the public sessions, which were transmitted through the Parliament's channel, so they were directly accessible to the citizens, but also they were open to citizens who came into Parliament and actually intervened. There were interventions and contributions by the members of the committee, as well as on the part of other contributors. We had a very large number of cabinet members who intervened and saluted the works of the committee. And at the opening session, we had the President of the Republic, as well as the Prime Minister, who were present, with the President of the Republic addressing a speech. The committee also decided to perform evidence collection, and so it went through case files which were held in Parliament, criminal case files transmitted to Parliament by the justice system, and having to do with how the loans were concluded and how the memoranda agreements were concluded, and these were very, very important elements of evidence. But evidence collection also comprised public hearings of important witnesses, such as Philippe Legrain, who was a former counsel to the European Commission head Barroso, or Panagiotis Romeliotis, who was Greece's representative to the IMF during the period when the memoranda were concluded. The committee had announced that it would publish its preliminary report in June. And it is now my conclusion that many did not believe it would deliver a report. This is why they were going along with the fact that the committee was working, but counting on the fact that maybe it would not deliver what it had promised. However, the committee delivered, and it published its preliminary report, which is this report, the preliminary report of the Truth Committee on Public Debt. It published its report during public session on the 17th and 18th of June 2015. It made this report available in English, Greek, French, and now it's available to a series of languages, and gave very important tools, very important argumentation to the government to actually refute the debt. Because according to this report, which not only as a member of parliament, but as a lawyer and as a person who is specialized in international law and human rights and constitutional law, I think it's one of the most concise reports on this subject. According to this report, the committee found that the Greek debt is illegitimate, it's illegal, it's odious, and it's wholly unsustainable. And in order to see what these words mean, I would refer you to page 10 of the report, where we have the definitions of these terms, which are very, very important for the cause of the abolition of the debt. What these terms basically mean is that the debt imposed upon Greece does not represent a fair policy towards the population. These words mean that the Greek population is being asked to pay, and the Greek state is being asked to pay what it did not actually spend through legitimate procedures. What these words mean is that the debt was construed and accumulated through gravely illegal and unconstitutional and undemocratic procedures. It also means that its repayment cannot be ensured without grave violations of the basic human rights and freedoms of the people. Finally, what these words mean, and especially the word odious means, is that the creditors had knowledge of the fact that this debt imposed upon the debtor state could not be repaid without such serious violations of democratic procedures and of human rights. This is a very, very summarized version of the report, which I urge you to read, because it has an analysis by creditor of what the debt means, what it constitutes of, and it shows some basic facts which are important to know. Fact 1. Even before the conclusion of the memoranda of the first loan agreements, it was known to the IMF and to its member states that the Greek debt is not sustainable. It's unsustainable. It cannot be repaid by Greece without totally destroying the social tissue and the society. This was public record. It's included in confidential documents which were in Parliament, in the criminal, that the IMF and the other creditors entered into these agreements while knowing that they were destructive to the country. On the counterpart, the Greek population never knew. They were actually being bombarded with information that the debt is sustainable, and that the only thing they need to do is conform to the memoranda, and the debt will be repaid, and the economy will revive, and society will prosper. A second fact that was shown in the report is that these bailout agreements never bailed out and were never destined to bail out either the Greek state, nor the Greek economy, nor the Greek society. They were destined to bail out French and German banks which largely profited from their knowledge that the Greek debt was unsustainable and that it needed a haircut. They knew this since 2010. It is public record that the French and German governments committed themselves that the French and German banks would not would not transfer the Greek bonds they were holding, and still, from 2010 to 2012, when the haircut of the debt was performed, German and French banks disposed of the Greek bonds they were holding and thereby gained large profits in tens of millions in tens of billions of euros. On the counterpart, Greek banks did not profit at that point. They were destroyed by the haircut, but they were bailed out by the second memorandum, by the second bailout program, which transferred their losses to the population through taxation. What basically the report shows is that the Greek debt is actually initially private debt transferred onto the shoulders of the people. It's private debt turned into public debt so that the people pay for banks, the people pay for the financing system. Now, I have 3 minutes to tell you what happened after the report was published, and I will do that in 4 minutes or in 5. And I see the negotiation was very successful, so I will speed up. On the 25th of June, an ultimatum was addressed to the Greek government. It basically said, you should accept that the Greek debt is sustainable, and you should accept as a means to repay it more measures, more public spending cuts, more cuts in jobs, more cuts in pensions, more cuts in general to the social and welfare state. This extortion had a twofold, let's say, presentation. It was comprised of 2 documents. One was called, one had to do with measures to take, and the other one was called Preliminary Debt Analysis for Greece, and it presented the Greek debt as sustainable instead of unsustainable. On the memorandum, on this ultimatum, there was a decision by the government to conduct a referendum. It was the Greek parliament, the Hellenic parliament, which decided that the referendum will be held. I'm very proud to have presided that session, and I'm very proud because this was a true moment of democracy. It was the first, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but it was the first referendum held in Greece during a period of 40 years. In Greece, in the Greek constitution there is a special provision for referenda, and still this provision was never ever activated in 40 years. It was only activated in last June and July, and it resulted to a 62% no to the measures, no to the ultimatum, no to austerity, and no to the extortion. And it is important to know that this no was pronounced loud and clear, even though there were very direct and very blunt interventions in the democratic procedures by officials, government officials, but also European officials, international institution officials, who all addressed the Greek population with terrorizing speeches such as a humanitarian disaster will occur if you say no. And this is a direct act of war if you really threaten the population that its popular vote may result to repercussions. And there were actually repercussions, because what was imposed to Greece after the no vote, but also what the Greek government has gone along with after the no vote, is a total defiance of the popular mandate and of the popular vote, is a total turning around of the popular mandate and the acceptance of measures even harsher, even more unsocial than those which were rejected by the referendum. Whatever is described in this report was accepted and repeated time and again by the government and by members of parliament who had undertaken to fight against these precise methods. And I'm here to say that this is not a failure of those who were committed to request an audit of the debt and request the abolition of the debt and fight for the rights of the people. This is a failure of those who suddenly accepted to preach Tina, to preach that there is no alternative, although there is and there always will be an alternative, so long as there are people, so long as there are social movements, so long as there are people at the institutions but also in the streets who are committed to fight for what they have been all about during their whole lives. I must tell you that what the government accepted to do was not what the majority of Syriza accepted to do. There was almost 1/3 of the parliamentary group of Syriza who voted against those measures. There was a major wave of departures from Syriza, and there is within the Greek society right now a very big need not to admit that this was a defeat of a policy, not to admit that this was a defeat of the left or that this was a defeat of those who represented the alternative, but rather to show that there still is an alternative. Let me close by saying, even when you reach a dead end, and this is what history has shown, even when you reach a dead end, and your only way is the way leading to a cliff and to your destruction, you always have the alternative to take a shovel and build the other way. And I have to say that I'm very inspired by the very initiative called the European Assembly on Debt, a European Citizens Assembly on Debt, because I largely believe that the alternative is within us, is among us. The alternative is not a recipe or a plan which will be given to us as a God-given medicine. The alternative is for the people to first of all become conscious and conscient of what is happening to them, to know exactly what the debt represents, to know the mechanisms of imposition and subordination, and to always know that in democracy they are not only entitled, but also they have the obligation to resist and fight against policies which are directed to annihilate whatever has been the very core of human civilization, the very core of democracy and freedom during the last period, and what needs to inspire the core of democracy and of true participation during the years to come. So instead of giving you a recipe, let me just say I believe the alternative is not in closed rooms where government officials negotiate or bargain, but the alternative is in open social reunions, in open movements, in social movements, in political movements, in European-wide movements of revendication, of demand, of struggle in order to protect and resurrect democracy and the rights of the people. Thank you.